So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and we're excited to talk with children's authors Kit Rosewater and Christina Soontornvat. If you have any questions for them during the conversation, please post them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the program. So I'm going to start with introducing both our authors. Christina is a storyteller, engineer, and STEM educator. She is the author of the fantasy middle grade series, The Changelings, and the early chapter book series, Diary of an Ice Princess. Her books published in 2020 include the middle grade fantasy, A Wish in the Dark, and All 13, a nonfiction account of the Thai Cave Rescue. Kit writes books for children and lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with her adoring spouse, adorable baby, and a border collie who takes up most of the bed. Before she was an author, Kit taught middle school theater and English and high school English, and then worked as a children's bookseller. She has a master's degree in children's literature from Holland University, and books 1 and 2 of her debut middle grade series, The Derby Daredevils, are now out, and book 3 comes out in June of 2021. So welcome, Kit and Christina. We're so excited to have you. And since you guys are going to lead the conversation today, I'm going to turn off my camera and I'll turn it over to you. And then I'll come back at the end for audience questions.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's such a pleasure to be able to sit down and chat, especially with Christina, who I admire so much. I'm really delighted to be able to talk about series writing this evening, just because so much of my school visits and chats are usually just about writing in general, which I also love talking about. But I think that there's a lot that goes into series writing. And so it will be really fun to dive into the ins and outs of that. The series that Jennifer introduced, my debut series, is called the Derby Daredevils, and it's about a junior roller derby team based in Austin, Texas. It's a rotating protagonist series. So book 1, which has the subtitle Kenzie Kickstarts a Team, is about, she's not really the team captain, but she kind of pulls the team together. Kenzie. Book 2 follows her best friend, Shelly. And book 3, which is coming out in June of 2021, follows Tomoko. And it's been a really lovely experience to kind of not only explore roller derby through these different lenses, but also explore really different characters as well in their home lives. And I just have so much fun every time I sit down with this series. So I'm really excited to talk about it tonight. And I'll turn it over to Christina.
Yay, thank you, Kit. I'm also so excited to be here. I have lots of questions for you. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot from you about writing series, because I have the Derby Daredevils and I love it. I think it's so awesome. My daughter started reading it also. So I'm probably mostly going to be talking about Diary of an Ice Princess. So I have 2 series. One of them is for older readers called The Changelings. And those were my first books that I sold, first books that I wrote. Diary of an Ice Princess is chapter book series. And this is from Scholastic. Thank you so much. My husband's bringing me my Ethernet cord so that I can hardwire in, because everyone in the house is on Zoom right now. Does that sound familiar to you, that everybody's using internet? So Diary of an Ice Princess, this is a 6-book chapter book series with Scholastic. And it's about Princess Lena. And Lena she's a princess. She's royalty. She lives in a castle in the clouds with her mom and her dad and her adorable puppy, Gusty. She has everything any kid could possibly want, except that what she wants more than anything is just to go to a regular school with her best friends. So she wants to be just a regular kid at an elementary school. And she finally convinces her parents to let her go. And they make her promise that she must keep her magic a secret. She can't let anyone know that she's actually a princess. And of course, that's easier said than done. And things get dicey and icy, and there's lots of hijinks. And that was such a fun series to write. And I'm working on a new series right now. So it's hard. It's not easy to write it. So that's why I'm excited to be talking with Kit, and I'm going to ask her to solve all my problems. So
I'm so excited about this. I everything you write is just amazing. I love Gusty, my favorite, obviously. But gosh, what category is, or can you even talk about it at all for your next series?
I can't. Let me think. As we're talking, I will think and see if I can talk about it, because it hasn't been announced yet. But I'll figure that out.
But I think you do kind of, I mean, you're hinting at something really important, which is, you debuted with a series that you said was for older readers, middle grade, and then Diary of an Ice Princess is chapter book. What's interesting is that the Derby Daredevils actually started off as a chapter book conception series. Like the first book was written fully as a chapter book, didn't really have a lot of roller derby, and then went up to middle grade. So I do think there's definitely like different approaches with whatever category, you're writing when it comes to series writing.
Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about that, because that was my first question for you is how did Derby Daredevils come to be? And I was going to ask you about the age level, because to me, this is so perfect. And there's not enough books in this range where it's middle grade, but it's not like 300 pages long, it's an early middle grade, I think. So yeah, tell me all about it.
Yeah. Let's see. In the fall of, I think 2017, I was super, super fortunate, and my agent came. She wasn't coming to visit me. That would have been really awesome, but she was just coming by Austin. And I was still in Austin at the time, and she was like, what should I do? What should we do? And we went to, like, at my insistence, because at the time I was a huge roller derby fangirl, still am. But I was, less involved with it. And so I took her to a roller derby bout, and we were working on something completely different, but we were having just trouble with it in the revision stage. It was an older, kind of darker middle grade project. And she, we were watching the roller derby bout, and she said, oh, this is so much fun. What would you think of writing something to do with this for a chapter book? And, for anyone who doesn't know, the categories of children's books, there's YA for young adult, there's middle grade, which is usually between ages 8 and 13. And then chapter book is for younger, chapter book's kind of like the first thing they get into after the early readers. And that was completely new for me. I had not done any chapter book writing before. The first thing I do whenever I'm approaching something new is I just read a gazillion mentor texts. And there were chapter books I loved when I was a kid, but it was so great to see everything new that had come out, because I think that's really important, is to see, the newer chapter books, things that you definitely wouldn't have seen growing up. And I loved how humorous they were. As from a writing standpoint, I like the idea of being able to read the whole thing in a day and kind of like get your claws around it. I always do this because when I'm writing something that starts to get too big for me, it's tough when I can't like see the full picture. So I wrote first draft of the Derby Daredevils, which was called The Flannels because it was just about a friend group. And they happened to go to a roller derby bout at the very end of book one for a birthday party. Mm-hmm. And it was so much fun. I've never written a book so fast, even though it was short. It was still written like ridiculously fast. It was like 2 weeks and of the writing and kind of the reviewing. And my agent loved it. We went on submission with it. And the cool thing was that editors were really, really interested, but we were hearing from like 5 or 6 different places. Can this be a little older? Can these girls, they were in 3rd grade, and they said, what would you think about aging them up to 5th grade? And we want more roller derby. And we heard that from like multiple places. And it was kind of a no-brainer because all I had written before chapter books was middle grade. And so it was really exciting to kind of, as you said, Christine, you're starting to look into this gap of, they were calling it lower middle grade. So that lower end of the middle grade spectrum, and kind of like how you scooch things up without like losing the fun that was there in this chapter book state. So it got rewritten, and we were really fortunate that several places, loved the new version. And we ultimately went with Amulet over at Abrams because they were the only imprint that was suggesting illustrations. And that was really fun to think about illustrations in a middle grade book. But they do Diary of a Wimpy Kid. They know what they're doing. So it was kind of a no-brainer to go that route. Yes, I love the illustrations. Thank you. See, they're just out of my reach.
I love the illustrations in the book. It's just, I mean, why don't they just illustrate everything? I know the answer to that, and it's money, but really, there should be illustrations in every book, I think.
It is so much fun. I mean, from kind of the standpoint of kind of reader intimidation and this idea that having the illustrations in there, it breaks up the text enough that it feels really, at least as I was looking at kind of the proofs, feels really digestible. And I was totally really getting the appeal of lower middle grade when I saw those illustrations peppered throughout. So yeah, I love where it ended up. Started as a chapter book series, and I have tons of chapter books over here, and I've got a whole other wall of books over there. And I'm so glad I got to research chapter books, because maybe that will be a future thing someday. I really want to pick your brain about what it's like to write a chapter book series and how that differs from middle grade from you. Let's focus on the Diary of an Ice Princess. Where did that come from?
This is very different than anything I've ever written. So, most of the time authors come up with ideas for their books. So like Kit's Derby Daredevils, she came up with that idea all on her own. Sometimes editors have an idea and they reach out to authors and ask authors if they would like to write it. So they have an idea, but they're going to get somebody else to write it. So that's how Diary of an Ice Princess came about. So my editor for that book, she reached out to my agent and said she had read The Changelings, which is my first book, and she wanted to know if I would be interested in this idea that they had, which was for basically like, what if Queen Elsa was in the 3rd grade and went to a regular elementary school? That was sort of like, imagine this idea. And I had to try out. I had to kind of submit. I never figured out, they never told me, oh, we have this many other authors who want to write the series. I don't know if anybody else submitted something, but I had to submit a sample. I had to come up with my own character. They didn't have a name for her. They didn't really have like what her family was like. And they just kind of had these 2 sentences idea for the series. So I had to come up with the whole thing of having a best friend and having, actually, I was going to say, and having a dog, but I think that was actually my editor's idea. She was like, wouldn't it be so cute if she had a dog? And I was like, Gusty, his name's got to be Gusty. So the whole like meat of the series is what I got to come up with. And that was really fun. Sometimes the hardest part for me for writing something new is there's just an infinite possibility for what a book can be. And so sometimes if you have a constraint, like she has to be in elementary school, she has to be keeping her magic a secret, she has to be a princess, it has to be snow powers. And then from there, you're like, oh, I know exactly what that will be. It's like you can be more creative when you have more constraints almost, which is something that I think most people would think the opposite. Like if you have no constraints, then you can be the most creative. But sometimes for me, it's the other way around. So when I wrote, I think what they really liked about my sample that I sent to them is that, Lena has all these adventures at her school. She's trying to hide herself at school, and she's doing like a talent show or, a big art project or something like that. So she has a lot of experiences that normal kids would have, but her family is a huge part of the storyline. So in the the story, her grandfather is the North Wind, and he's kind of like the king. So he's very like, prestigious and royal, and she has this big legacy to live up to. So every book I get to write about her family, and so there's always something about her family in there, which I wrote it a lot kind of like my own family. So that was been really fun. So, and I had never written a chapter book before. I did the same thing you did, like picked up lots and lots of chapter books. And I have two daughters. I have a fifth grader, and I know we have a fourth grader with us. We have Olivia. She's watching and she's in fourth grade. So I have a fifth grader and a second grader. So writing this was just like perfect because we're right in that zone. We're reading books like this. And so my second grader and I can read these books together, and I can pick her brain and steal her ideas. I steal a lot of ideas from my kids. So that's how that one came to be.
I think that's wonderful. And well, maybe I shouldn't, condone stealing, but I think that one of the best things about being a teacher when I was I would just jot down like little funny things that they would say, or just wonderful kooky ideas that they would have. And, so that I think that's brilliant. That worked out really well with your family and how old your daughters are.
Oh, yes. I tell them, I tell their friends when they come over, I'm like, I hope I'm going to be writing about you, probably, like these conversations and jokes that they're telling. And in the last book, in the Diary of an Ice Princess series, the girls are putting on makeup because they're going to a royal wedding. And so they're getting dressed up and they're putting on makeup, and they're like they're putting on eyeshadow, and they're just wobbling their eyes under their eyelids back and forth to look all creepy. And that's just directly from my kids. That's what they do when they put on makeup.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
But yeah, being a teacher, oh my gosh, that would be so good. Like so much stuff you could steal from kids if you were a teacher.
I know. And I really miss that. I was a substitute teacher, just basically like right up until the pandemic hit. So through, I think early March was my last gig. And it is fun. And I do miss it a lot because I find that if you're quiet enough in the classroom and you're just kind of working on your own thing, it's perfect because then the students just act like you're not even in there. When I was a full-time teacher, sometimes I'd have to be like, don't talk about this because, I don't want to have to like be, they'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't even do this homework for this class. And I was like, I'm right here.
Yeah, right. That's funny.
I love that.
Now I was going to ask you, did you outline all the books in this series before you started? That's a question I always have for people who write series.
Okay. And I'm going to be interested to hear your response on this too. For the longest time, I felt like I was never going to be a great writer because I have a very like kind of organized, planned brain. Oh, which is my left? Is this my left? Is this my left? This is book 1 of the Daredevil series. Sorry, I just saw in the chat. And then this is book 2 in the Daredevil series. So this is Shelley's book. Let me bring it closer.
Book 1.
Shelley Struggles to Shine. And so there's Shelley and there's the rest of the team. I have a really organized head. And so I have to plan, I have to outline really carefully. And the truth is that kind of up until this series, I was always worried that maybe I was kind of cutting myself off of, I don't know, interesting, surprising things that, my writer friends would talk about saying, oh, I didn't plan for this at all. It's just like, driving at night and you can only see a little ahead of you, but you find yourself in these amazing places. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. But yes, I outline and I love outlining. I feel like for this series, it's really helped me understand the strengths of planning and outlining. Mm-hmm. With book 1, obviously I had to plan that pretty thoroughly to go through. But, with book 1, especially because it was a new category, we were really just waiting to see what was going to hit the sweet spot for the publisher. From like a word count standpoint, chapter books can be like around 10,000-ish words. Middle grade, at least the middle grade I was am writing is closer to 50,000. So we hit it like, the correct mark that Abrams was looking for with about 24,000 words. And I found that the first book helped me so much for writing the subsequent books, because once I knew that this was going to be a series, I thought, okay, well, it's obviously really important to have some fun surprises, new perspectives. But from a formatting standpoint, I really want to find consistency. And no one asked me to do this, but it just, no one said I couldn't do this. Basically, I realized I had 18 chapters, I had about 24,000 words, and that worked really well for telling the arc of the story I wanted to tell. And just as you were saying, Christina, with sometimes restraints can be helpful with being creative. I actually thought it was really helpful when I was starting book 2 to say, okay, this is going to be 18 chapters. So I've got this rough idea of how, the arc is going to sit, but what is Shelley's story going to look like? And how is that going to be different? So I do sit down and I plan the story beats out. So not chapter by chapter to start, but kind of where I want the arc to go, what event, like once you have the pitch, I'm thinking about what do I want the big midpoint to be? What do I want to be the total crisis for her? And then once I kind of have those big picture things, I go back and then I do a chapter outline. And it's really easy because I can communicate well to my publisher and say, here's exactly what I'm thinking. And they can kind of catch things at the start rather than me having to write the whole manuscript first. And it just helps me. It makes me feel safer when I'm writing, like, okay, I've got this general idea of where I'm going. It's not pitch black out. We're in the middle of the day. I see where we're heading. So it really helps me to do that. I feel like you have this like really great variety of topics you cover. And I want to ask you about this later, about how to kind of, piece that apart from book to book. But did you find yourself kind of planning each of the books in the series?
Originally there were only going to be 4 books in Diary of an Ice Princess. And so I kind of just came up with 4 ideas. I didn't have them all planned out before I started writing the first one. And I had no idea for 5 and 6. But I think there's different kinds of series. Like for Diary of an Ice Princess, it's kind of like a TV show where the characters and you're going to come back. And what would the TV show be like? I don't know. For some reason, I'm thinking of Full House or Fuller House. Now it's Fuller House on Netflix, like a sitcom where it's just like characters and they're going to get into hijinks every single book, right? Or every single episode. Then there's series that is like Avatar, The Last Airbender, where it's sequential, it's all leading up to something. I always wonder, I'm like, how do authors do that who write series like that? Because sometimes you don't know if you're going to have 5 books or 7 books in a series. Because sometimes if you're really lucky, the editor will come back and say, oh, we actually want to have 10 books instead of 7. So you must, I don't know, they must do some sort of planning. I need to figure that out. But yeah, so I do the same thing as you, outline each book, but if they came to me and asked for more Diary of an Ice Princess books, I would say yes, without having any idea what they would be about. I would just come up with that later. Lots of adventures that could be had.
Because you have the same protagonist for each book, I am really curious, how do you kind of figure out how to do a new arc each time? Just because I feel like so much of the writing, like the craft books that I have, which I love reading craft books, but so much of it is like you've got to find this character's main story. You have to find their main problem and kind of lesson that needs to be learned. And so how do you go about that for a protagonist who's going to learn a lot of different lessons over time?
No, that's such a great question. And it's like the main thing I think about if I'm writing a novel or series like this is the character. You go to your main character and you think about what is it that they think they want. Mm-hmm. So Lena, Princess Lena in this book, she thinks she wants to fit in and just be a regular kid. And And then you have to think about, but what do they really, really want? Like deep inside, what do they really want? So Lena, what she really wants is to figure out who she is, like figure out what is special about her, like how does she fit in with her family, and what's her role in her family, and being this weather princess, right? So for the series, I feel like that question, who are you? What is your purpose? What is your goal? Is something that we're always constantly working on, right? So I feel like even though each book she grows a little bit and she changes a little bit, overall she can always keep going, right? She can always keep getting closer and closer there. So every book she's kind of trying to figure out a little bit more who she is and how she fits into the big picture. I mean, I'm 40 and I haven't figured that out. So she's only in second, third grade. We're going to have lots of room for growth for her.
That is true. It is really nice to write a series about a kid or a group of kids, especially because they are doing so much learning. As you're working on books, do you ever specifically kind of sneak in kind of references to lessons that she has learned from past kind of hijinks from earlier books?
Yeah, I totally have. I think it's important that if you're a fan and you pick up book 6, it doesn't feel like you're starting all over. Like you kind of see that, she's standing up for herself a little bit more. She's a little bit more confident than she was in book 1. So she is changing a little bit, just like a kid. You're changing, you're getting closer and closer to who you're going to be every day.
And what about time? Do you think at all about, for the Daredevil series, for example, that was like a weird thing with me, is like, oh, am I going to pick this up right when it ends? How far in the future? And so with each of these books, I've been doing about, a month or a couple of months to kind of keep things moving, to show, the girls getting, more and more confident. But also I don't want, they're kids, and there is so much changing that's done that I don't want it to speed up too fast, because then I'm worried, the content will get away from me. And almost like with some series, it grows up in categories if you follow the kids along, like, goes from middle grade to YA if it's a kid's age. So how do you treat time between your books?
It is just always third grade. I don't even say that I don't even say that. I don't think I ever say she's in third grade. In my mind, she's in the third grade. So it's like my kids, they love Calvin and Hobbes. And one of my daughters, she was like, Calvin never gets older. He's always 6. And I was, Princess Lena is always in the third grade.
I think
it could be any day.
Really well.
Yeah, I think for this age group and this, but yeah, I could see how for yours that would probably not make as much sense if it's just like always the same time.
Right. And I think it's tricky when you put it into the context of, a sport and something to be learned. Right. You have to, if like the big thing, because my biggest thing, since I'm not following the same protagonist again and again, my biggest thing is I always want there to be kind of, 2 arcs, one for the main character and then one for the team. What is the team doing? And so if the big thing in book 1 is just going to be simply getting them all on skates and getting them all onto the rink to try something, obviously we have to kind of make the stakes a little higher, do something like bigger and different. So it's their first tournament in book 2, and then it kind of, keeps going from there. But right, I don't want it to go too far. So I'm always like, no, it's just been a couple months or a month.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, we're at 7. Do you want to see if anybody has questions? I know we had. Look, if you have questions, you can ask Kit and I any questions and type them in the chat.
That's right. Just post them in the chat. We do have one, and then I kind of have a couple too. So let me start with this one that we have. So this one's for Christina. First of all, I loved A Wish in the Dark, and my question is, it seems like so many people are reimagining, retelling other stories. Jane Austen, Great Gatsby, Sherlock Holmes. Why did you decide to build off another story? And is that harder or easier than starting from scratch?
Oh, such a good question. And look, if I was like a good author like Kit, I would have all my books with me. But I'm like in my bedroom, squirreled away. So I don't have a wish in the dark. Or I would show you. So she's talking about my latest novel. It's a middle grade novel, and it's a
so good. Sorry, my one of my best friends has it right now. I'm so upset because it sits in the purple section right here.
I love that I'm in the purple section. And it's a twist. It's a children's twist on a classic novel by Victor Hugo called Les Miserables, which is like old. It's like 150, 200 years old novel. And so, yeah. So why did I choose to do that twist? And is it easier or harder? I chose that book to do a retelling because Les Miserables is my favorite book. It's my favorite novel. It's probably the novel that made the biggest impact on me as a reader. I read it when I was in high school, but before that, I loved that Kit was a theater teacher because I was like such a theater junkie and so into musicals. I was so into Les Mis, the musical. As a kid, as a 10-year-old, like memorized I could sing the entire thing, every single part. But the novel was my favorite because of all of the themes. The big themes in that novel is like, what's the difference? How do you know something's right or wrong? What's the difference between the law and justice, which I think is just a never-ending question we are constantly trying to ask ourselves as a society. And of course, recently we've been talking about that so much, about social justice and what does it mean to have equality, to have fairness in our own country. So it just has all the elements for a great story. And there's so much adventure in the story too, because it's about a chase. So A Wish in the Dark, my book is about a boy who is born in a prison. He escapes, and then the prison warden's daughter is chasing him because she thinks that's the right thing to do, is to turn him back in. So there's adventure, there's a lot of action. There's room to have magic in the story too. So it just seemed like the perfect retelling. And I don't know if it's easier. I think there's something easier about having a place to start, but writing it was not easier. It was hard to write. Really good question.
But so good though. I mean, I absolutely my favorite book of 2020. So good.
Thank you. That makes me so happy. I'm honored.
Can I ask what, since we've done, I maybe I'll just kind of use this for my own questions for you now. How long was that process, or how did that process go for A Wish in the Dark, for just the standalone middle grade?
I had been thinking about it for a while and I could never really wrap my head around it. And then when I decided I was going to set it in Thailand, base it in Thai culture, then everything really clicked. But it still took a year to write it, the full manuscript. And then, of course, after we sold it and I had an editor, I had to go back and revise it so many times. But yeah, at least a year, a lot longer than Diary of an Ice Princess.
So I have a couple of questions. So my first question is, in Diary of the Ice Princess, one of the things that I really liked was at the end, there were science experiments. I think this is awesome. That there are fun little instructions on how to do whatever science experiment that kind of relates back to stuff that happened in the book. So how did you kind of make that decision that those were pieces you were going to kind of include?
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you like that. Yeah, that's my science nerd, science lover part of me coming out. So before I was a children's author, I was an engineer and I worked for like 10 years in science education. I worked in museums. So in Fort Worth, the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, I used to do a lot of work with that. I didn't work for them because I live in Austin, but we would do a lot of projects together. And that was actually the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History is what made me become a science educator, because I went there with my parents all the time and I just loved it so much. It's like one of the best museums in the country. And so I knew that Lena was going to be, the school she goes to is a science school and she loves science. And so it just felt so right to put a science activity at the back of each one. So fun.
So we have another question. You both have great illustrations in your books. Can you talk about the process of selecting an illustrator and any helpful hints for working with illustrators?
Yeah, Christina, do you want me to go or you want to go first?
No, you go.
Okay. I absolutely agree. I was and am extremely fortunate to have worked with the illustrator Sophie Escabas, who is also a graphic novelist. It's too far away, but her book, The Witches of Brooklyn, which is actually the first in a graphic novel trilogy, came out this fall, so she's very busy. And I think her next book in that trilogy is coming out sometime in 2021. The process of working with Sophie was a little unconventional in that I understood that my editor was going to present 3 illustrators to choose from, and that I would, I would be able to, I would just pick and we'd go forward and work with one of those. And it was kind of an unconventional journey just because my editor hadn't yet picked 3. There was kind of a little bit of hold up with that. And as I was waiting, my agent had suggested that I look up illustrators to see styles I liked so I could kind of figure out what I was really hoping to get out of the illustration. And, the Derby Daredevils is an kind of queer, friendly, inclusive series. We have a trans character. And so it was really important to me for proper kind of representation and really kind of really thoughtful representation. And then, of course, because it's a roller derby series, I wanted to make sure that the illustrations conveyed a lot of action and movement. And so as I was researching illustrators, I came across Sophie Escabas and her Escabas. I don't know why I pronounced that wrong. I came across her portfolio and I fell in love with Sophie's work. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I was a little bit of a stubborn author, and I'm so glad that I didn't, burn bridges forever with my editor, because basically, rather than wait for her to, they're so great. Rather than wait for my editor to come up with people, I emailed her and I said, please, it has to be this person. And I sent all of these little kind of pics over from Sophie's profile, and I put together like a 30-point slideshow. I'm sorry, a 30-slide PowerPoint where I would took like little moments from the text, and then I would like pair it with one of Sophie's illustrations. And I said, please, it has to be Sophie. So they put Sophie on the list of 3, and I was just like, yes, that one. And it worked out, and I can't believe it worked out. I cannot believe that I was so lucky that I just kind of fell in love with this illustrator's work, and then she agreed to work on the series with us. It was definitely quite a process. The whole thing took a couple of months, but for me, it's been just the most fortunate thing to happen to the Daredevil series. So.
That's so awesome. I love that story. And the illustrations are so good. And I have her graphic novel. I have The Witches of Brooklyn. I haven't read it yet. I think my daughter has read it. I haven't read it.
I'm going to grab it.
Yeah, it's very good. For me, see, this is so interesting because you're getting to see how different book projects can be. Because sometimes authors are given this chance to make suggestions, and sometimes our illustrators get picked for us. So I also write, go ahead. And you want to show Witches of Brooklyn?
Well, here's the cover, and I'll just open to a random inside. Also, this is just like a little factoid thing that I just find absolutely crazy and also amazing. Sophie wanted to do her own coloring of this, and that's actually kind of rare. In a lot of graphic novels, the author illustrator or the illustrator of a graphic novel will do all the sketching, but then the coloring will fall to someone else for just time. And so the fact that she simultaneously was illustrating, I think book 2 while she was, coloring, it's just amazing. But
That is
anyway.
amazing. That is a lot of work.
It is. Okay, you keep going with your process.
Oh, yeah. No, in addition to writing novels and chapter books, I also write picture books. And so in picture books, a lot of times the author does not choose the illustrator. Often you get input and your editor will give suggestions and they'll say, what do you think of this selection of artists? And you get to have input on it. But there are times, sometimes you don't even get that. And so for Diary of an Ice Princess, they already had the illustrator. I think they had the illustrator selected before they had me selected, actually. I don't know if that's true. I need to go back and look, but she was already on board. It was so quick. And her name is Barbara Zepezizux. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I have never met her or talked to her. She lives in Europe. She doesn't live in the United States. And actually, I don't think a lot of people know this, but authors and illustrators often do not communicate directly about the illustrations. So when I write a manuscript, even if it's a picture book manuscript or chapter book like this one, I'll write the text and then I type up little notes, and my note will just be Lena standing in a puddle of water. And that's all I'll say, just a suggestion for what the illustration could be on that page. And sometimes she does draw that, and sometimes she does something else. But I really don't give her a ton of direction. So then when I get the manuscript back from my editor, it will have her sketches in the embedded in the text, and I'll make little notes. I'll either say, I love this, it's so cute, or I'll say, oh, can we have her looking a little bit more scared here? This is a scary moment. So we'll go back and forth a little bit that way, but that's it. It's not this great collaborative process. And I think that's the case most of the time with authors and illustrators. It all goes through your team at the book publisher.
Yeah, I actually never included or include notes for what I'm always surprised to see what Sophie's going to illustrate. She just reads the manuscript. But like you said, Christina, I do get the opportunity to look over the sketches, and then, to be honest, I'm not sure if I've ever remarked on expression. Usually I'm just like this weirdo. I'm always looking at continuity. So what I'm always focused on is what the girls are wearing. And because sometimes what will happen is I'll have a chapter or 2 chapters that it's the same day, and the kids will be wearing different clothes. And so I got to make all these notes well, they need to be wearing this. And yeah. So that's usually the extent of my notes.
That's awesome.
And I always think it's interesting that a lot of people don't know that authors generally don't choose their cover art.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Right. Or have a say over what their cover art is. And there's been some incidences in the last 5-10 years of the cover art not matching the characters inside, right? So there was a big thing with a YA novel maybe close to 10 years ago now, where the character was Black, but the cover was a white girl.
Ah, that's terrible.
and it went on shelves that way?
Yes, it was the original cover, yes. It was the book Liar by Justina Labrèche-Delay. The initial cover was a white girl, and her character is biracial, and she talks about her hair and all this stuff in the book. So yeah, it was actually a huge deal at the time. But
Gosh, yes.
yes,
That's a fiasco. That's horrible.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, sometimes you just get what you get, right? Yeah.
It's tricky as the writer, just because, at least for me, a lot of the times I'm totally aware of the fact that I'm going to know all the little kind of intricacies and details better than anybody else working on it. So, a lot of the times it will happen where, Sophie or somebody else, or, like someone who's doing the design, will not pick up on certain things that are there in the text, because, they're focused on what they're focused on. Everyone's doing their part. So yeah, but
something like that.
That's such a
major mistake, though.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Major mistake. Yeah. Yeah. And, there's some other things kind of behind that situation. I think it was a big time in YA when they would say things like, non-white people on covers don't sell books and things like that. Right. So there was a whole lot of other things going on at the same time, but she got a lot of heat in the beginning because the cover didn't match. And then she was like, no, this is not me. No, this is not me. Right. Yeah. And they have since changed the cover. It's not the same cover. Yeah. So we have two other questions, and I'm gonna take the second one first because it kind of dovetails on what we're already talking about. Can you explain more how you get your illustrations if the authors and the illustrators don't actually meet?
Yeah. So we go ahead. So we authors work with, there's this perception that authors work by themselves, and actually we're a part of a huge team. So we work with an editor, and if we have art in our books, we have art directors, and those are two separate people. And we email back and forth with our editor who works at the publishing house. So like my editor is at Scholastic. So when I'm finished writing my book, I send it to my editor. My editor shares it with her art director. And then the art director is the person who works with the illustrator. So the illustrator then gives their illustrations to the art director, and the art director will put the text and the illustrator's pictures together. And then we kind of we'll send it back and forth like that. It'll go over here to a copy editor and go over here to another person to look at before it finally gets made into a book. Good question.
That is a really good question. I will say at this point, Sophie and I, we have spoken, but we've done an event together, and we've spoken because, we admire each other a lot. And actually my partner was a little bit not creepy. He was just really ambitious. And a couple of years ago, he reached out to Sophie first to ask if it was possible for him to purchase any art from her as a holiday gift for me. Aww. And that's how that first opened. But in the professional setting, Sophie and I, we never directly communicate. And the first way that we communicated at all when it came to art for the Daredevil series was that I simply just did a very rough character description for the characters in the books. And just as Christina said, that went to the editor of the series, who then passed it along to Sophie, and then we got character sketches. And then basically from that point on, once we were like, okay, these are the characters, usually I go through a whole process. And for me, Christina, copy edits always come before I even see the art. So as you said, there's just lots of different people moving in the team, and it kind of slowly comes together into one book.
Mm-hmm. All right, so next question. Has COVID changed your writing habits? I picture authors staying at home every day and writing, but maybe that's not what it's really like.
It's totally changed my world because I have children at home. So they've been home most of the time. There was, so many months where we were all at home. They're back at school now. They're in person, but altogether, they've probably been there like 3 or 4 weeks. So yeah, it's been very difficult to find time, like quiet time to write. I did write at home. I used to love going to coffee shops and writing in coffee shops. Like that was like where I could just like zone out and get so much stuff done. And I don't know what I'm going to do when I finally get to go to a coffee shop again. That's going to be amazing. Um, so that's changed a lot. Just the hectic stress of COVID. I think it just affects everyone, no matter what they're working on, no matter what they're doing. And then I would also be traveling so much, and Kit would have been traveling a lot to visit bookstores and schools. And I actually like, it's funny, my family is very happy that I haven't gone anywhere in a year. Like usually it's really hard for my kids when I have to leave, and Kit has a new baby. So that would have been, I think that, I mean, maybe it's been a blessing that you haven't been asked to go everywhere. You can be home with her, right?
Yeah, it's funny because I have an 8-month-old baby, and this is my first baby. And so I had this child 2 months into the pandemic. And, before I just don't know if parents can have much of a clue before they're parents about how drastically life is going to change. I can tell you, I did not have a clue, just because I had planned to do a lot of traveling, specifically to junior roller derby teams along. I had kind of mapped out 3 different like little tour things, and I knew I was going to have a baby. And that wasn't, so surprising. But I guess I just kind of thought, I'll just sling her over my shoulder and just go to all these places. And it probably has really been a blessing that's no longer expected, because it's not possible. Just because I ended up having a child who is very much, kind of appreciates and needs me to be there, for all of her waking hours. And then for the longest time, she could only sleep with me as well. So the funny thing about writing habits is that for me, I thought I needed so much to be a writer. I thought I needed to be able to have hours at my computer, and I thought I needed to have all these different kind of notebooks around me. And I, like Christina, I loved going to coffee shops. I love creating a ritual around writing, but I think one of the great things that both having a baby and in the midst of a pandemic, so basically meaning nobody could take her while I ran off to a coffee shop. There's nowhere for me to go. So, and really it's a pandemic. So we're all just based at home. What was great about that is it helped me relearn the fact that so much of writing and like the main core of writing, happens up here. And I was really kind of scared and intimidated when I first got back into writing around 6-8 weeks after she was born, just because I thought, can I still do this? But what I would do is, while I was holding her and she was sleeping, I would like think about the story so clearly in my head, to the point where I almost would kind of start telling it, and it would kind of almost be like a song getting stuck in my head. And in that way, the moment I could get to a notebook or a computer, it would just come out. And so I think that it's really pushed me to see, what can you do without and still be a writer? It's been hard, but a lot of really great skills that I didn't know I would be capable of.
Kit, I remember those days. Oh my gosh. You are doing awesome. You are doing awesome.
Well, everyone is. The people who have older kids at home, I mean, I think everyone is just amazing for us all kind of getting through this together. I don't think there's a really great or easy time to be on lockdown in a pandemic.
No. Well, and I have to say, being able to do author visits like this, I mean, so, everybody who's, watching probably doesn't know this, but like, I'm at my home in Fort Worth. Christina's in Austin, right? Kit's in New Mexico. And so a lot of these sorts of things we wouldn't have been able to do face to face, because there's so many logistics into getting that to work. And so I think it's definitely, at least for us, given us an interesting way to think about what are other ways that we can still provide programming and things, to library patrons. It's really made us think out of the box, and it's been an interesting time, for sure. Absolutely, yes. So we have another question. What advice do you have for self-published children's book authors?
Oh gosh. I don't know a lot about self-publishing. I know that there's so much involved in it. So if you are doing it, I highly congratulate you. That's awesome. It's so much work, I know. I would say my advice to self-published authors are the same as for other authors. Like, just there's so much you can do by meeting people and making connections with people in a real and authentic way. Kit and I, the reason that we're here together is because she made a connection with Jennifer, an authentic and real connection. And then we bonded over our books and talking about babies. And so I would say just relationships, everybody talks about, how many like ads you can buy or social media posts, and there's all these statistics and stuff like that. But really it's still, things are still happening from actual human connections. Those are the most meaningful things that I've done for my career is with real people.
Absolutely. I think depending on what category you're thinking of for self-publishing, if it's anything that would involve an illustrator, I think that illustration is such a big part of a book package in general. If you're writing a book that will, that depends a lot on illustrations. So I would encourage you. There's an amazing network of freelance illustrators and artists. It's quite phenomenal. So making those connections, and then, when I worked in Book People, when I worked at the indie bookstore, we had lots of self-published authors who came in, and they would, get great, shelf space over at kind of the self pub area, or gosh, now that I'm thinking about it, no, we had a little self-published display thing, but also, self-published books intermingled in all of the sections. And, as Christina said, it's a little bit tricky just because you have to figure out who's virtual and who's not as virtual during the pandemic. But I think connections are where to go. And there's so many great opportunities to, be able to share your story with other people, whether it's in writing groups, whether it's with bookstores that you can go into, if you're able to visit schools. So there's so much work. There's so much work that goes into self-publishing a book. But ultimately, as Christina said, it is just like any kind of writing and publishing of a book. It's all about forming that network to make sure that there's kind of a system to be able to pass your words along, rather than it just going into the void, because that's the point of writing, is that we want to share with each other, and those connections, those one-on-one connections are so meaningful, and you never know where your words will go. You never know where your book will go. You never know if you're talking to just the right person who's going to be able to help share your words with the community that needs to read them.
And I also shared a link in the chat for the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. I know that there is, I'm not sure if it's a Dallas or an Austin one. It might just be Texas in general, kind of a regional group of that. I know we see them a lot when I go to librarian conferences.
There's a North Texas one. There's one in North Texas.
Okay, yeah. So it's a good networking idea if you don't have if you don't already have people to interact with. So, all right. Well, we are at 7:30, so I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you would like to purchase copies of books from Christina and Kit, we've made arrangements with Monkey and Dog Books in Fort Worth. If you don't know, they are our local children's bookstore. They're over in the West 7th area, and we have their phone number and their website address here. And you can get in touch with them if you want to pick up books. And I also included some links as we were talking to the library's book catalog if you wanted to request some holds and have books sent to your local branch. So, and if you're participating in the Winter Bean Stack Challenge, you can use the code READ21 to record your participation in today's event. And then we have almost an author event a week between now and the end of April. And we have 2 more youth author panels coming up. One is in February and one is April 1st, I believe. And so we'd love for you to come back and check those out. And you can find more information about that on our website at fortworthlibrary.org. So thank you very much, and everybody have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.